It was about 8 o'clock at night. I was up at 6. I'd actually was less sleep than it sounds like because um, by the time I got out of the shower and everything, I wasn't in bed till close to 10, so it was about 8 hours, and it was broken by a couple of maybe sleepy. I think I'm hungry. I'll wake up a little after I'm done eating. Where did I put that coffee? I didn't finish it, did I? Is it behind there? Yeah, that's just a bad spot for it. Um, yeah, so it was punctuated. The landlord dropped by. Um, I guess it was around close to 1 o'clock or so. Um, he took the fan out and never came back. So I don't know. Um, I don't know what his plan with that is. Is this one of the things? The reason I had the fan running was because I was smelling stuff from upstairs. It's not. It's not. I can't smell it right now, but um, it seemed to me like the fan was cut in the work that they did upstairs. Um, they denied that, which is fine, whatever. That was just a guess. Um, but I was able to get the information out of them that the work that they're doing, they're not. They're not. Well, I mean, they were doing work in the bathroom upstairs. I guess it's done now. Now they're doing work in the bathroom 2 floors up, right? So they claim that it doesn't make sense for them to have cut it because they're 2 floors up. Um, it does make sense that if they're doing work up there, it might have been a factor in the um, smell as it was floating out. He claims the fan just died. Um, I didn't hear any warning signs. It didn't slow down. It didn't start making noises. It doesn't. It still doesn't really add up in my mind. But whatever. Bring a new fan in, and it's a simple enough resolution. To I mean, if it did just die, I guess that's something that happens from time to time, right? But like I didn't hear it. It didn't whir. It didn't make any noises. It's like it really seemed to me like the electrical was cut. Anyways, uh, unfortunately, any progress that I thought I was making with him in understanding the nature of the conflict appears to have been short-lived or evaporated entirely. Um, he continues to fundamentally misunderstand the nature of the concern. Um, he does not want to talk about ways to mitigate the smoke. He continues to imagine scenarios where, the reason that there's smoke in the hallway is because somebody's smoking in the hallway, which there's no evidence of. Um, he claims that people are leaving the doors open, which there's no evidence of. Um, and it seems to be rooted in a refusal to deal with the actual problem the way that the problem actually exists. Now, I don't. This isn't going to be a problem when we show up there next week and talk to the judge because um, I mean I suppose there's some possibility that the judge might be his friend or something, but um, I think that's remote and ignoring that obvious absurdity. Um, I mean, he would have to. if we did show up in that situation, the judge would need to recluse themselves, right? That's obvious conflict of interest, but um, presuming that I can get, something halfway approaching an objective process here. Um, that these are not arguments. I mean, like there's no evidence anybody's smoking in the hallway. There's no evidence anybody's keeping the door open. And even if there is, that is it doesn't remove their liability, and it just demonstrates that um, the situation requires some kind of effort on my behalf to mitigate, right? I mean, in the off chance that he can convince them that there's smoke in the hallway because they're keeping the door open, well, that's an argument that I should have more tools at my disposal in order to mitigate it, right? I mean, it's his argument is nonsense, and he's constructed it because he thinks that that's an argument that will prevent him from needing to do something. When in fact, if he could somehow convince the judge that that's the problem, that would just strengthen my argument, right? So how do we get to this point? It's where he's presenting arguments that are not in his favor and thinks that they are, because he fundamentally doesn't understand, right? And I've been over this before with this, like this. I don't know the new property owner so well yet. It may turn out that she's a little bit more intelligent. Um, this guy presents himself as the smart one. He thinks he's the smart one. Um, he's not evil, right? They're not evil. They're not malicious. They're just not smart. And he needs to be included in this because um, I mean he just, as I've stated repeatedly, I'm not trying to insult him. I'm not baselessly accusing him of or whatever. It's just getting your head around the situation requires recognizing that these people are not intelligent, and that the situations that arise could only arise in that condition or in the presence of that condition. And it's just you couldn't understand if you're standing from the outside in and you're trying to grapple with what's happening. You couldn't possibly understand this without recognizing that truth, right? So he still remains. You can tell when I'm talking to him that he thinks I should have sued them, right? He thinks I should have sued the smokers upstairs, and he's not. He's having a very hard time grappling with the abstraction. I asked him the other day if he'd ever heard the term duty of care, and he hadn't, right? So it's just this whole, and I think I went over this before as well, this whole abstraction of tort law. It's people, if we should have tort reform, it's that we need more education around what the law is. I would prefer to abolish civil law, right? I think the only law that should exist is tort law. And we should deal with all law on on a relationship between people, and essentially all crime reduces to negligence. And I mean, this is how all law should be dealt with. We should get rid of jails. We should get rid of cops. We should get rid of all this kind of stuff and just deal solely with a negligence liability relationship. That's how all law should be. You can call me a barbarian, I guess, in a certain extent, or in a certain way. You're kind of right. I'm not. I never have been in favor of empire or the systems that empires use to create order within their boundaries. Um, the the seeming cruelty of barbarian cultures um, aside, the greater level of democracy has an upside to it, and I'm in favor of tort law because I'm in favor of democracy, right? It's how a society that governs itself would have to organize itself. And I mean, then you could change the formalities around a little bit. Maybe less control for a judge and more control for a council or whatever. But it's fundamentally a more organic approach than the king's law, um, which is what we have right now, right? Things against the law because the king or the crown. I don't. I just do not like that approach to things, and it's ironic because it was in Britain that the system developed, and because of the vacuum of authoritarian power that was there, and all these different people from all these different places trying to get along, right? Trying to synthesize their cultures into one thing. The point being that he doesn't get it, right? So he comes down here and he's talking, he's like blah blah blah, and it's just like you can talk all day, but you don't get it. And like, where are we going from here? There's no. So I mean, he let me put the fan back up, and that's good. It's a good first start. But he's already talking about like, okay, so when are you gonna take the fan down? Well, no, it's like you don't get it, right? The fan's got to be there, so long as there's smoke coming out. It's not like, and does it make a difference? I mean, in the space of 24 hours or 48 hours, it's very difficult to come to a conclusion, right? But if you ask me, it's at this point right now, it's night and day. It's you walk out there and you can't smell it at all. The air is completely clear. In such a short time period, it's difficult to come to such a certain conclusion. But if we're to ignore the reality that there are other factors, and we're just to compare the air right now as to a couple of days ago, it's working spectacularly. Now again, like I say, be careful. But I mean, if I was to make a short-term conclusion, it would be that this is a spectacular success. A spectacular success. I mean, and it's probably better to have the fence up a little bit and over to the side. And this is a better arrangement than the chairs. So the conversation that I had with him today just reinforces the need to bring the situation in front of the judge. One of the requests that I put in was to allow me to run the fan. To stop. That is the technical reason I'm suing them. I'm suing them because they asked me to stop running the fan, and they're trying to force me from running the fan. Right? That's why they're being sued. I think maybe the new property owner gets it, but he doesn't. The guy that they've got running as a superintendent doesn't. And it would probably be better if he just kind of faded off into the distance, so long as everybody understands what their obligations are. So, why did I go to a judge? I went to a judge because people didn't understand their obligations, and they needed to have that explained to them. It looked initially as though they might be starting to understand their obligations a little bit better, but after the conversation I had today, I remain convinced that they do not understand their obligations any better than they did previously, and we do still require um, the legal analyst. They call this person a judge or an adjudicator or just a lawyer. Um, we do still require that person to explain to them what their obligations are. And that if they do not want to follow their obligations, or they refuse to accept their obligations, then we'll need to look at extreme options. Another underlying misperception is that, and I got this more from the superintendent, the live-in one, who seems to have had that responsibility taken away from him, which was another request I had, and I think that there is at least consensus on that point, that he shouldn't be asked to do anything of this nature, and that he should call someone else if he needs anything at all, right? There does seem to be consensus on that point. It's this idea of property rights, and underlying their confusion seems to be this perception that if they own the property, then they can do what they want with the property, right? And that's what needs, like, we need a lawyer to explain to them that that's wrong, right? That's not how property relationships, and especially not how tenant-landlord relationships operate under this legal jurisdiction that we call Canada. Um, it's how some people imagined things ought to be several centuries ago, and that was never implemented anywhere. And in this particular jurisdiction within the broader British Empire, the property rights regime was weakest. And there are protections for property rights in the United States Constitution. There are no such protections for property rights in the Canadian Constitution. There is no mention of property rights in the Charter of Rights and Freedom. The case law is very clearly not in favor of it. We rule in favor of tenants almost all the time in this country. Okay, landlords. It's very difficult for a landlord to win any sort of case here. We almost always take the sides of the tenant. And if anything, it's not an argument I would make because I don't believe in property rights. But if you wanted to if you wanted to take an objective analysis, the truth is that in Canada, the law is maybe skewed a little bit too much in favor of tenants. There is an argument. I mean, I wouldn't make it or advance it, but if somebody else did, I might have to sit quietly and bite my tongue because I might not have a good argument. So, I think a lot of the confusion is arising from that kind of a colloquial, American-centric concept of property rights. As mentioned, I'm pretty sure these guys are Americans. In some way, I don't know how long they've been here for or whatever, but they might have dual citizenship or something. It's just, it's clear to me that they have some kind of connection to the United States, right? So, they seem to be thinking in that kind of a way. Bottom line is this, like I say, I went to the legal system because we needed a higher arbiter because they were demonstrating that they didn't understand their obligations. It seemed like we were getting closer, but after today, I am left to conclude that they are no closer to understanding their obligations, and we are in no less need of needing to go to the higher power to have those obligations explained to them. And even if the judge doesn't order any actual action, I think that it is going to be exceedingly useful to have them put in front of the judge, and have their actual rights and their obligations explained to them. Because I'm not asking for anything extraneous. I'm not asking for anything unusual or anything extreme. Um, I've actually worked costs into my um, requests and what I'm doing, right? I've been very sensitive to um, uh, their resources are not particularly limited, but they're not infinite either, right? So I've been sensitive to the reality that they do not have infinite resources, um, and try to um, work out what I'm doing around the, a set of reasonable constraints. I've tried to be the reasonable person, right? Um, but I have rights that exist under law. Some of it constitutional, some of it legislated, and some of it judicial. And while I'm not interested in being onerous, I do expect my rights to be respected. And like I say, I think that the primary breaking point is in having those rights explained to them. And I've tried to do this as best as I can, but they're going to need the judge to do it, and that's okay. Um, so yeah, I mean, any optimism I had from I guess it was Monday or Tuesday. Any optimism that may have developed is muted, to say the least. We're gonna have to take it to the judge and have them. I mean, even like I say, even if at the end of the process, the only thing that's arisen is that the judge says you know, you have to let me experiment. If that's the only outcome, then the legal weight of the adjudicator saying you have to let me experiment is enough. And if they won't do it, if they continue to refuse to cooperate, then we may have to revisit the wall, right? I mean, I hope they don't think that all they have to do is get through the next couple of weeks and then the specter of the wall has faded. If we get through this process and they remove cooperation the day after, then my argument for the wall is that much stronger. And again, I wish they understood. Because that's I thought I was making progress, but my optimism must be muted. That's what we can say here with this. Now, what about tonight? I gotta make some eggs. I'm hungry. Um, the machine's running from there. I'm gonna have to find a walkthrough. And am I alert enough? We'll find out when I'm done eating. I might actually just get some more rest. I don't know. We've got rain all weekend. There's almost no chance I'm going anywhere Saturday. And yeah, that's going to be the night is just working all this out from here.